And one year we were lucky enough to have the valedictorian of Scarsdale High School as one of our students. And to talk to this kid, this young lady, was quite marvelous. She would talk about advents in biomedical engineering. She had a balanced geopolitical perspective. She read Harold Bloom for fun as a companion to her Shakespeare anthology, which was not assigned by school. And for all intents and purposes, it was like talking to an award-winning PhD student who was amid their dissertation. And then she had to take the ACT. And considering she had A pluses at arguably the world's most competitive public high school for 4 years, I figured a test wouldn't be so hard for her. And she got a 29 out of 36, which to much of the world would be a quite above average score. But to arguably the smartest 17-year-old I had ever met, I was stunned that her score wasn't perfect. And she at some level was stunned that I thought it was going to be perfect. And so we got into a little bit of a dialogue, and it went something like this. I said, "How do you study for the exam?" And she folded her arms with like the pride of a valedictorian. And she said, "Well, every Tuesday and Saturday I take a full-length ACT practice exam and I go over what I got right and wrong." And I kind of shifted in my chair like I'm shifting now and said, "Is that all you do?" And she looks at me bug-eyed. She's like, "That's 10 hours of studying a week." And I started laughing. I said, "How is that studying?" And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, let me take a guess here. You pretty much get questions 1 through 15 correct every time. You really hate dual passage reading questions. You miss questions that are word problems in the math section and maybe a probability question or two. And the science section, it really depends on the topic they bring up." And she just sat there stunned, like, "How did you know that?" And I said, "When you study for a test in school, do you go back and get all the old exams that teacher gave and just start taking them one by one?" And she said, "No, that would be really inefficient. I just open the textbook and learn the stuff that I don't know." And I said, "Yeah, why don't you do that instead?" And she said, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "You're going to continue to get the same questions right and wrong. Why not just study the stuff that you're getting wrong?" And you could see the light bulbs flashing over her head. And so I called her parents and I said, "Listen, I know you guys are big into studying, and good. Well, you should be. But I want to do a social experiment, and unfortunately you're the guinea pig. There are 5 weeks till the next ACT, and goodness knows she wants to take it again. She can study 1 hour a week, but she can never take another problem from the actual exam. She can only study the things that she doesn't know, and she has to use other resources." And they were like, "But that's 10% the studying she did previously." You could see where she got it from. And I said, "I know, but look, I'll take the heat if this doesn't work. But could you enforce her not continuing to take practice exams?" Fine. 5 weeks later, she got a 35. And this created something that I have talked about with every private counselee since, and I call it the Scarsdale principle after her. And it goes like this. Raise your hand when you've solved this algebraic equation. All right, go ahead, Chris.
X equals 0.
Super. Okay. So I assume that just in case any of you really find the amount of math a high school student needs to know is daunting, that's like middle of the first 10. So There are two ways to do this problem, right? One looks like this. And so I subtracted 7 from both sides. 2x equals 0. Divided by 2, x equals 0. A. I like writing it out this way because my favorite personal steps are not only dividing 0 by 2, a real mystery what you're going to come up with there, but then writing the answer to the question in the lower left corner, like, so I'll remember to bubble in A. Now, it is conceivable that someone would bubble in D after doing this, but considering 0 is probably going to be the first choice unless there's a possibility of a negative integer. You're basically saying, in the 1 in a million chance that I forget that 0 is the first choice while transferring from the bubble sheet, I'll write it. And generally, the Scarsdale principle is 1 in a million things do not happen on the exam. In fact, I have some anecdotal reasons for saying that. When I took the real deal SAT, one student vomited on me during one section. During another section, a student fainted and landed on me. And so I watched as EMTs pulled him off me as his eyes were rolling back in his head. And I still did fine on the exam. I think that's about as close as a 1 in a million event is going to occur on the SAT, and they rarely have that much effect on the outcome. What you want to do is deal with the primary factors that affect scores. The way to solve this equation according to the Scarsdale principle raise your hand if you did it this way. That's the principle. 2x plus 7 equals 7. Well, obviously whatever is before the 7 equals 0. I've asked this question to probably 100 students at this point. The average response time is less than 2 seconds. And it leads me to the beginning of any discussion on standardized testing. What does standardized mean? I'm going to tell you that standardized does not mean that the knowledge they're testing is considered standard according to a high school. That is not what standardized means. Standardized is a term in statistics that is used to score the exam. Does anyone have a working definition of standardized? This is more out of general curiosity. Would anyone actually know what that word means that almost every high school kid utters? Here's a working definition. In statistics, the standard score, also called the z-score, or normal score, is dimensionless quantity. Is a dimensionless quantity, right? It has no meaning unto itself. Derived by subtracting the population mean from an individual row school and dividing the difference by the population standard deviation. This conversion process is called standardizing or normalizing. A standardized test goes through this process before it's scored, such that on the SAT, if you were to be the only person in the world taking it, because it's a dimensionless quantity, if you were the only person in the world to take it, there's no point in answering the questions. You'd get 500 on all 3 sections, because that is what they're trying to do when they standardize the score. I'm not going to take a lot of questions on it, except to say that people think that standardized comes from the idea of educational standards, but it comes from the idea of normalizing or standardizing. And this actually has huge implications for how you tutor. In standardized testing, everything is relative. Standardized is, to make the description short, a synonym for competitive, because you're looking to compare people in a population. And so how do you compete on an exam? Well, you've got to get more right than other people. And because the amount of time is fixed during the exam, the Scarsdale principle is go faster. If we go back to our 2x plus 7 example, I would say the amount of high school students who would answer that correct is probably around 98 to 99%. The ones who miss it, most of it would be due to sloppy error. So you're not going to win the race there by being more accurate. You're going to win it by going faster. Because if you can do things faster, you can check them more. You can do every problem twice, thereby virtually eliminating any real chance of sloppy error. Those 1 in a million chances become 1 in never. What that student in Scarsdale was doing, and I saw her sample exams at that point, was this. A question that would take the average high school student 3 seconds to answer was taking her 30 seconds. 27 seconds she didn't have for a later problem. Because she was writing this out, and I believe me, she was writing out the divide by 2 and the x equals 0. From this point down, at least half of this is absolutely already done in your head before you move the pen. It takes longer to flourish the pen than write it. The eyeball test would have been the best way. Getting to 2x equals 0 and clicking A would have been the next best. And saying to myself, I should find enough time to get back through the test. The Scarsdale principle might be fall into the realm of game theory. I often call students who do this gamers. People who are tennis players. Concert pianists are good at this type of thing. They're like, look, it matters what it sounds like. It matters whether I win more points than the other person. It doesn't matter whether every stroke or every key press is a thing of beauty. They think about what it will look like in the end, and so they come up with shortcuts. They come up with ways of getting to the end.